So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu chapter 1:8, we then understand precisely what the Creator himself has spoken with Yeshayahu the prophet regarding the holy cities. The cities based from the city of the desert, organized and supervised by Moses himself. As we understand then, when the sun came, obviously the city model of the desert was then used during the time of the Messiah's time, during his 1,000 years. These cities were then destroyed. In 1009 was then the last holy city destroyed, and then came the 1,000 years of deceit. As the New World Order has ended, we are then back on track, reading our holy instructions and understanding then the movements of the nations. It's extremely important for us to understand the importance of the gathering of both sons. The first son, Ishmael, the second son, Yitzhak, both of them joining. So then, as we understand during this time, there are some very important news development these last few days. Firstly then, let's understand what goes on then obviously with the leader of trade, China. Then the analysts are very excited regarding then the yuan euro direct trade. So China has done it again. It is absolutely amazing what China is doing. And then these last few days, within these 10 days of time, China has become then the utmost important system of the United States. And also China has linked its system with the euro, and then the salvation of the eurozone is then linking up with the euro. This truly is the first great news. So then, the Chinese yen can be directly traded with the Japanese yen, the Australian money, the Brazilian money, the euro, the New Zealand money, and many other countries. China's objective is having the entire world being linked up with its system, and the time will come for it. The second news is then obviously Alibaba leads global equity capital markets. Alibaba once again leads the world. The Chinese system has come, as it was said before, and we are only expecting the third step, the linking of the investments, or the icon of investments linked with it. So then China then receives exclusively the investments of the world and those responsible internet users using their computers for investments and payments, and also doing trade via online. So this is the second great news, providing us with more evidence and then believing the holy instructions further. Then there is a problem. Germany is going to try to play a decisive role in Ukraine. That's going to be very troublesome. As we understand from Daniel, the second chapter, where then the big statue was then shown the king of Babylon, he was extremely concerned regarding his dream, and then Daniel later on he was able to say the dream and then its interpretation. Back then, during the time of Daniel, it was then a time where a nation was in charge. For instance, Babylon was for some time, then the Medo-Persians were then, and then later on the Greco country, and then Rome, and many of them symbolized by special types of metals. But then we understand the base of this statue. Daniel then was praying and fasting because, as it was usual, there was a leader of the head, a leader of the arms and chest, and the leader of the mid body, and then the leader of the legs of iron, but did not have a leader of the base of this statue where iron does not mix with the clay. Thus Daniel then put himself at work, and he was then fasting and praying for more than 20 days until he received the understanding that a nation, or then a kingdom of the east, would then provide the leadership amongst those countries of the base of the statue. So then, as we can understand, United States, Germany, and many of these countries, they are trying to get a hold of a system, being then the head of the system. And this doesn't exist anymore. This unified system from a nation only does no longer exist. We are speaking of a system providing benefits and resources for those nations who are responsible, and then does not provide resources for those nations that are not responsible. That's why you read then, iron and clay, they do not mix. But let's understand this further. Ukraine wants to become part of the West and the West trade, but the problem is the Holy Instructions are saying very clearly regarding then the northern kingdom must become greater than the first. So then, as we understand at the moment, because of the Islamic State, they are the sons of Ishmael, they are providing a decoy at this very moment so the Soviet Union can make a deal with Egypt. It is extremely important because the other great news is regarding then the friendship of the Iranian president, Mr. Rouhani, with Mr. Putin. This truly is an absolutely the utmost important friendship ever, because these nations are going to be joining so then Egypt can receive what it wants, precisely then related with arms. Egypt must receive arms of every kind so Egypt can then reclaim what Egypt was centuries ago. It is the utmost importance. So let's read then a section of the Holy Instructions of the 11th chapter of Daniel. It's very simple. Explain then the objects of Egypt going into exile for a time. This means the glorious time of Egypt was placed aside for a time. But then Egypt was then receiving its status from the northern kingdom. You can read this from the original manuscripts. You can translate those holy words of Hebrew and then place it into English, and then you will understand the flow of events. That's why Ezekiel, the first chapter, explains those round things going around. Those are then cogs, or then gears of a clock, you might say, in each of them in a specific event, at the same time synchronizing and working together. So then, as we understand then, and he shall stand from the kingdom of the north. So Egypt then must receive arms from the Soviet Union. And obviously, President of Iran, Rouhani, must stay put and do his work, because the previous president of Iran, he was right. Israel is the tiny Satan, and he was absolutely right in every aspect. United States then and Israel, they are the Gog and Magog of our time. So then, since there is a decoy of the Islamic State, of the sons of Ishmael, this truly is for the purpose of trade and, speaking of military, for the Soviet Union to provide arms for Egypt. From then on, the developments will become more clearer. China has done it again. China is the leader. China is then doing more trade than ever in the Pacific. If you watch the news, the stock market of the Pacific is soaring very greatly, and the CEOs of many companies are very optimistic of this new, in quote, wave of trade coming from the Pacific. As we are then watching the United States becoming more entangled in this decoy war, the more China soars, and then trade is truly improving in the Pacific. Because of these, nations then are becoming more skeptical of the leadership of the United States. There is not much to invest in the country. There is only destruction and death. As we can understand, the economy of the U.S. is not improving, is not growing, and the time is then against these war fronts. A huge problem is starting with Islamic State simply because they are going to be joining together in tiny groups around the world, and they are going to do much damage as they promised, and they will to do it. And because of these and the expenses of war, then we understand those nations using the USD are going to become to sense and understanding from abroad, and the exchange is going to increase in price. It's the only way they can pay for the wars. And these obviously draws us closer to the Holy Instructions, because there is a section related with the despised one. But since US then is going to receive much wealth from the system, and you can find these in the 11th chapter, nearly during the time where then the ships they return, and the ships then return to their bases, a bit prior of this event of returning to their bases, becoming then endowed with a great wealth. This truly is because of the linkage of the system with the USD, or most importantly, the USD being linked with the system of China and doing direct trade. However, there is a point of analysis where then the answers are yet coming, because China has much gold. China uses gold for the protection of their yen system. However, when we place this in the market, combined with investments of products online, you have to understand then the intricacies of the exchanges of gold, then the monetary system, and investments at the same time. As these are becoming more popular, then the establishment of these percentages are becoming more evident when you mix the gold and the investment and the virtual Chinese money. As nations, they are direct their economies towards the electronic age, then more of these systems are becoming more evident. Now, how are they going to play out in the near future? We can simply understand a fact. These systems are becoming virtual, and as they become virtual, there is then a percentage of protection of these monetary systems via gold. So many of these systems are then being generated, but the most important is having these links and exchanges done instantly. Thus, when people are doing trade with these systems, then instantly governments must receive their shares as far as taxes are concerned. Then it's done via online instantly. Now, for this to take place, they have to have a centralized place, such as the Bank of China is the most qualified for such huge task of control and percentages. Nations who are then simply printing out money, placing under the pad, simply they are going to be left out. And they are going to be governed by the freighters near them. So then, because of these, we then as users, we can only understand a fact. A huge site where you can understand products, where you can buy and you can send and you can invest at the same time. As earnings then they come every month, they are going to obviously turn it around and invest more, and they're going to gather more. However, taxation is then doable when you understand sending items, sending packages, sending merchandise. Then you can understand taxes linked with it. As far as investment, there is not a system set up yet in terms of how much a person can earn via these system of investments in products of China. And then sending and transferring, there are no laws yet placed, so then nations can obviously do this kind of a system, and each individual with a computer doing trade with China and investments with China then can pay their dues. Thus far, there is not a system yet set up, because the system is extremely broad and picking up the trails here and there and the other and making sure these they work together harmoniously under a system of taxation won't be as easy. And this war front, or this new wars front in the East, is going to drain much of the resources of those nations who are involved with, but then provides the Soviet Union a very broad highway for them to do trade with Egypt and then Africa, while the US then is involved and entangled with wasting of resources. Then the Soviet Union is doing obviously its work in joining up with Egypt and then later on with Africa. So then, great news. We have these understandings, and can be sure of it, the Ukrainians and the Germans are not going to get along as far as we can understand of the Euro system. The Euro system is stagnated, but once again China has done it, and there is direct trade with Euro. So then these new perspectives of the Pacific and great wealth and prosperity can then be part of Europe. Next time we're going to evaluate more the situation, because more developments are taking place, and then we compare them with the whole instructions, and we know where to go and what to do. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.